City Council Workshop and Regular Session, Thursday, June 17, 2021 at 5:45 p.m., City Hall, 3300 Corinth Parkway. Pursuant to Section 551.127 Texas Government Code, one or more council members or employees may attend this meeting remotely using video conferencing technology. The video conferencing technology can be accessed at www.cityofcorinth.com/remote session. The video and audio feed of the video conferencing equipment can be viewed and heard by the public at the address posted above as the location of the meeting. At this time, notice is hereby given of a workshop and a regular session of the Corinth City Council. I call the meeting to order. At this time, we'll all stand and have the invocation by Mr. Garber, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance and the Texas Pledge.
Thank you, Mayor. Father, as we begin a new season of our asset allocation and budgetary excellence, Father, we pray for your mercy and grace on our decisions as we begin to move forward with those. Father, we also pray for your grace over our public safety personnel and, Father, every other staff member. May they serve this community with peace and excellence, and may your righteousness be manifested in the hearts of all of those that lead and serve. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you. Workshop agenda. Item number 1, draft tree preservation ordinance provisions, concepts for discussion, consideration, and direction. Mr. Hart.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we want to have Michelle Mixel, our planning manager, to come up and lay out this item.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Okay, so this is a continuation of something that we started back in November, or October actually, 2020. So in your packet that went out last week, you have an outline of the draft, proposed ordinance regulations. And I'd like to walk you through those this evening. So we're going to do a quick overview of the background, how do we get here, and then talk about the ordinance in general, and then receive some input that we need from you on a few key items to make sure we're going in the right direction. And so with that said, October, November 2020, we held our first workshop sessions to talk about this item. We discussed challenges and opportunities at that time relative to the tree preservation practices in Corinth. We talked about the prior past practice and the way that the ordinance had been interpreted in terms of offering some exemptions and how that was resulting in some limited tree preservation, and that there really weren't any incentives for preserving trees or to incorporate those trees, important trees, over 6 caliper inches in diameter at breast height, into actual site design. So we went to the drawing table and we developed an ordinance. Well, actually, what was interesting, and you'll see, the other thing that was facing us, the last treed parcels in the city were under pressure for development. And we also reviewed benchmark city ordinances for best practices. And we discussed at that time offering incentives and credits to reward quality site design, and potentially offering a penalty or really a stick for removal of large trees. So what was interesting at that time, right as we were thinking about how to move forward with the ordinance, we also had a number of developments coming in. And one of which you just saw recently was finally approved for the tree alternative approval was the Walton Ridge single family. And if you recall, they preserved last month 56 protected trees in a deeded common open space. So that was about 3% of the overall site, the protected trees on site. So they preserved 56 of 1,700 or so trees. And that occurred in a pocket, what they're calling a muse lot, and it's a grove, which was significant, and that'll remain perpetually. One thing that occurred with that, though, they did have the prior practice exemptions because they were grandfathered. They did receive credit to offset mitigation for trees by planting, reducing the mitigation by planting within the common open space. And they also received credit toward park and trail dedication requirements as an incentive. So in my opinion, I think that's key in the sense that we're offering credits for replanting, and we also offered this ability to satisfy the park requirements. Prior to that, if you recall, they were going to scrape the entire site and protect 0 trees. So we took that to heart, staff, and we applied what we were learning to the Ashford Park subdivision that was coming in. And we had the opportunity, because it was a PD, to start writing and playing around with offering some credits and working with the developer, testing back and forth what would be an incentive for them. So in this case, we were able to offer some credits, also account for private deeded common open space that'll be open to the residents of the neighborhood. We were able to save 15.3% of total caliper inches on site, which is much more significant. They're preserved in common open space, what would have been on prior 6 buildable lots. They received first a base credit of 1-to-1 for any tree that they preserved. We gave them a reduction. We then gave them a sliding scale option if they preserved groves of trees, so if they would cluster them. So they went back to the drawing board, and we showed this to you, I think, at the November workshop, that they went back to the drawing board and started seeing what, at first they had only preserved this section, and then they added a few more, and finally we ultimately ended up with 6 additional lots. And then as part of the PD, you all you approved the common open space land and credited that for preservation of trees. So those were 2, in my opinion, positive results. Now, how does that relate to the existing ordinance, and what are we doing? So when we went back to the drawing board trying to determine what to keep, what to remove out of the existing ordinance, we decided we just need to rewrite the whole thing, repeal and replace, using the same section. So we went in, we didn't have a purpose at that time. It was not clear as to why we were even preserving trees. So we have, and you'll see when you get the draft in detail, it defines to promote conservation or context-sensitive design, to ensure reduce erosion, provide canopy cover, all sorts of things that are environmentally valid for a public purpose. We also went in and established clear definition to provide operating language that reduced ambiguity in the process. Prior to that, our existing ordinance, there were no definitions. We were, guessing in a way, because and when you don't have a definition, you go to what is a common definition. So we wanted to make sure we're all on the same page for our development community as well as staff. And we also wanted to be sure we identified what land was subject to tree preservation regulations. So we wanted to clarify that all undeveloped and vacant land, and then land to be redeveloped or altered or expanded, would be subject to the provisions. We did go in and tweak this a little bit. We're exempting out existing single-family dwellings or 2-family properties, and we want to clarify that by indicating that after initial development, where they're occupied as a resident, so long as the property is not being developed, redeveloped, platted, replatted, or subdivided. So we wanted to avoid a loophole where someone might have an existing residence and cut down all the trees by giving them this exemption, but rather by clarifying we're not negatively impacting an existing residents who might need to remove a tree. And so the current UDC exempts, this is the way it currently states, a tree in the front yard of a developed and owner-occupied residential property. We're just saying residents, rather, it's still it would still be owned by someone, it's just not necessarily owner-occupied. We can change that back, but I just wanted to point that out, that is a change. We identified nurseries, and we also wanted to clarify that if there were any dangerous and hazardous conditions, that a tree could obviously be removed, and it's more specific in the ordinance. The other thing that we're proposing for your consideration is, rather than calling it alternative compliance, we're proposing to call it a tree removal permit. And it would be a new process where we would establish a formal procedure that would allow us to track it more easily, and perhaps, with your blessing, move it to a staff administrative approval process with the option to defer to City Council if a complicated situation would arise. The application would continue to require a tree survey, tree protection plan, and a landscape plan showing proposed replacement of trees. Now, with that said, the question is, we'd like to confirm that you would permit us to go to administrative approval with the option to defer, or if you'd prefer a hybrid, we can continue as we have been going, where City Council continues to see and approve the large-scale developments, so you have more involvement. And then perhaps at the staff level, rather than the small-scale existing single-family platted lots of record, like the Bluffs at Pinnell that you see, the individual lots, perhaps staff could just do those rather than, bringing them forward. The other thing I wanted to point out is that developers would continue to have the option during the PD rezoning process, just as they do now, to request alternative standards to this ordinance once it's established. So if there's a situation that, the property is unique and they just even can't fit within, or it's not working for all involved, with even the new ordinance, we can address that at that time if someone's coming in for a plan development. So perhaps put a flag on what you think about administrative, and then we can talk about that at the end. Benchmark cities, just to give you a feeling, Frisco, all of these are administrative. So Frisco, director or designee. Allen has an urban forester on staff. Capel, city manager or designee. Rowlett, the director, though, may have the option to defer to different entities. Carrollton, director or designee. And then City of Corinth, City Council. So continuing on within the ordinance, there's a tree permit required, and that would establish the activities and require a permit application unless, of course, specifically exempted. So anytime a grading permit would come in, obviously we would have to examine trees. And there'd be a verification option if there were no trees on the property, no protected trees, the applicant could, the landscape architect or arborist could sign off. So if you're platting or doing any site plans, or if you're simply wanting to remove a protected tree, you would get a permit. We define the context for the application. Right now, it's not very clear. We just want to make sure that there's consistency. Again, we outline tree protection survey, the protection plan, the landscape requirements, and we're defining specifically what we want in those. Right now, it's not uniform. We define, what constitutes a violation, and right now this is by no means complete. We're evaluating whether or not a penalty of a 2-to-1 replanting ratio might occur. So let's say someone doesn't come in for a permit, they clear cut an entire site, and they don't even have a site plan or grading plan. We're evaluating, and we'll do that, and of course bring that forward at the hearing process, whether or not a 2-to-1 would be reasonable. Maybe that's something to think about. We've defined a specific tree permit review and approval process, again, staff level, with the option to defer to council, as previously mentioned. A deferral procedure, where the planning and development director may defer at any time to city council on a challenging topic. And then, of course, an appeals process, which we don't really have defined in the current ordinance. So if the applicant needs to appeal the administrative decision, they can go right to city council, and you would have the decision-making power. Okay, so in terms of mitigation requirements for protected trees removed, really this is the meat of the ordinance, in my opinion. It establishes the replacement rates and credits for trees removed and saved based on a development type. And so this is where we were able to test the waters using the Meritage and Walton Ridge to see what the development community might be willing to consider. So the first thing, though, is existing single family and two-family dwellings. They're exempt, as I mentioned. Undeveloped single family platted lots, that would be the Pinnell Point. No, the bluffs at Pinnell Point. We're proposing that the removal of the protected trees would be consistent with the way that we're doing it right now, based on prior past practice, continuing to exempt trees that are within the footprint, that are within utility easements, within the driveway. So only those areas outside would be subject to mitigation, and they would continue to be replaced at a 1-to-1 ratio, as we currently have established. And then the last piece is the big item, which is the undeveloped land proposed for new development. And this is where the sliding scale that we thought we came up with when we talked earlier, and these are numbers just for consideration. They can be adjusted based on real data, and we plan to test this against actually Meritage to see how it might work, how it might impact based on the draft figures. But this would be currently any mitigation is assessed at a 1-to-1, regardless of the size of tree across the board. What we're proposing for consideration, if it makes sense, is that we would increase the replacement requirements up to 2-to-1 for a tree that was greater than 20 caliper inches. Now, I know that Ms. Pickens, when we talked, you had mentioned large, important trees, and we can up this number. I was playing around, so maybe keep that in your back pocket. If this is addressing what your concerns were. So in terms of the benchmark cities, the sliding scale replacement rates, I'm pointing this out that Plano, Denton, Frisco, Capel, Allen, Flowerman, and so forth all do have some variation of sliding scale. I need to be clear, though, that it's not apples to apples, because each city, while we might have similar removal rates, or sliding scale, each city offers exemptions in a different fashion. Each city offers credits in a different fashion. So really, in my opinion, it's based on what is our own unique situation, what are our own unique values, and what is our relationship with our development community. Right now, we have a replacement rate straight at 1-to-1. It's the same way that Rowlett does their replacement. Meritage, Ashford Park, their replacement rate was at 1-to-1, and they ended up preserving a significant number of trees. So even without this stick or penalty, whatever we want to call it, we were still able to result in a subdivision that preserved a significant number of trees. Now, that was a unique situation, and we'd like to test out how this might work. And we're giving a little bit more credits, you'll see, than what we did for Meritage. So a higher number may work. And again, putting this in your notes, is this approach the city would like to take? Note that the credit of the sliding scale is proposed for large trees to help offset the replacement of the sliding scale above. So you'll see in the next slides, to encourage preservation, even though we are requiring this more significant replacement rate, we do offer credits that are higher than these numbers. Are you guys with me so far? Okay, thank you. So in terms of credits, this is a summary sheet. The ordinance, of course, would be much more detailed, but the way it's organized, there's a base credit for every caliper inch preserved within a common open space on the site. And the reason why we're using common open space as a threshold is because if you're on private property, especially when it becomes a single family, existing family platted lot, and we're exempting those, what's our how do we protect that? So the credits are primarily at this point based on what's being preserved in common open space. So if you preserve 10% or less, no matter what it is, you get a 1-to-1 credit. If you go from 10.1 to 15, you up by 0.5. And then if you preserve 0.5 or more, like what Meritage, Ashford Park did, then you can apply the sliding scale where the credits really become significant, where it really entices, hopefully, the developer to preserve or cluster and protect some of the groves and habitat. So there's also a bonus of 0.5 on top of this, scale. So if they, and Ms. Pickens, I went in the reverse, rather than penalty, we're looking at a credit. So hopefully if it's a tree of 36 inches or 48 inches, you get a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 credit rather than a penalty.
I guess why wouldn't the penalty be equal to the credit?
Well, the credit is, I guess it could, and we can look at that, especially I'm going to ask for George's assistance when we get down to really looking at numbers using Meritage as an example. The concern would be is if we have a penalty so high on the front end that it may become too
Cost prohibitive.
Cost prohibitive, yes. Who said that?
I guess, Scott, I guess, like I get it if it's in the development.
Yes.
In the center of the development to pull out some trees, and there may be some heritage trees that are going to be lost.
Yes.
But I know that there are some in undeveloped pieces of property in Corinth, one that sits at the corner of Lake Sharon and Current Street.
Yes.
It is a huge, beautiful old tree. I would hate to see that tree be taken out for a driveway. So I guess my question is, are we encouraging maybe some adjustments of the development to try and save those trees, to kind of adjust some things to save? I get you're going to lose trees when you develop. Like, you can't develop that property without taking trees out. It's just the old heritage trees that really I would hate to see, taken out.
100% agree. At the staff level, when an applicant comes in for design, we try to encourage and redirect and steer the design. I think that this credit might work, though. Maybe what we can look at is if it's a 36 or one of those higher ones, maybe we keep from 20 to 36 the same, just the 2-to-1, and then add in if it's, this really important 36 or greater, then it becomes, maybe it becomes a 4-to-1. Even more.
I don't want it to be a deterrent to development.
No, I understand.
We don't want that at all. But those trees are, and I mean, I'm not, a crazy, environmentalist or anything, but I just think saving those trees that have been around longer than probably all of us combined, I would hate to see a tree like that be taken out for a driveway.
Agreed. So I'll add that, so you'll see it in the draft of the ordinance. That's good. That's the feedback that we need.
And Mayor, may I ask a quick question? So this question's actually for Kelly. The Walmart in Highland Village is, I'm asking this to make sure that I understand. Maybe this is what you're talking about. That Walmart was almost not approved because there was a 200-year-old oak tree, and council challenged the Walmart to incorporate this tree, which happened to be in the middle of the property. And they put a really nice little seating area around the tree, and it's right in front of Walmart. So that type of heritage tree, finding a way to incorporate it, if at all possible, into a development.
Exactly. And maybe if they're able to save those, and it gives them a good incentive to save that tree, which this does, that will encourage the preservation of those, the heritage trees, those like Scott was talking about, that's at Walmart in Highland Village. I mean, do you know which tree he's talking about? It is like right in the center between the grocery and the regular Walmart, whatever you call that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I've heard about it. Miguel has seen it, our planner, and commented. And I think doing what you say, and then also you'll see in the next few slides where we offer additional credits if you save a certain percentage, and on this sliding scale, even for commercial development. And I'm gonna be more creative after. I'm gonna try to figure out a way to incorporate what you've just said about the site design. So thank you.
I don't want to make it unnecessarily complicated, but
That's okay.
a particular problem I feel like we have is that we have a lot of post oaks which are not particularly hardy or long-lived. And so I wouldn't want somebody to preserve really big post oaks that are probably going to die and not preserve other trees, or give that tree more importance than it maybe should have, even though it's a large, beautiful tree, knowing that after the site develops, that tree's likely to die in 5 to 10 years. I just want you to give that some thought, because that, I feel like I've seen that in a lot of developments where they preserve, particularly post oaks, I've noticed, that just don't, then they die. And you've preserved this tree, and maybe you traded some other trees or something else for that, and it's just not going to live very long, and so you don't really get a benefit long-term for having preserved it.
Okay, we can look at that. Thank you. Some of the other things that we've done, and this threshold of 20%, if you're saving 20% on site, that can go up or down. 20 is just the starting point, and the reason being is that Ashford Park is a good example, which at the 15. So I feel like I know what we're dealing with. So let's say if someone were to preserve 20% of their caliper inches on site within a common open space, perhaps we would allow them to also receive credit for trees that they save that are less than 6 inches, that are still within that species, because they'll obviously mature into something, and also help with habitat and erosion control and so forth. We were thinking about landscape credit for any shade trees and ornamental trees that are planted in the buffers or detention ponds that are approved as an amenity. So right now, and I'll use Meritage as an example, they, and you haven't seen their alternative compliance yet, they haven't come in, you've only seen their PD with the stipulations, but they received a number of credits, and their landscaping is not counted as a credit against their mitigation. So let's say if they were to preserve 5% more, perhaps that's something that the city would consider, let them have credit against landscape that's required no matter what. If it were a green site, you would still have to plant that's still in your performance. You're still counting that. So that's one thing that would be considered. Also within the public right-of-way, giving a credit based on the percentage of any base credit preserved. So I know that was a big deal for developers. They had been accustomed to receiving credit for trees that might have been within the right-of-way. Perhaps consider that if they meet a certain baseline. Another one that we've talked just generally internally about, perhaps there's in terms of promoting economic development, maybe we consider allowing commercial buildings, just the footprint of a commercial building, if the overall design of the site is context sensitive, and perhaps there's a plaza that's incorporated with, or a small green that incorporates some trees, to go in toward helping. And then also throwing around the idea of maybe there's also, after all of that said and done, perhaps there's a standard deduction, just a standard credit like in your taxes that you might just get. One of the inequities I think that I see when it comes into the heavily treed sites, we say if 50% or more is heavily treed, then you get 50% off. Well, what if you're, 46%, or you have some really beautiful trees that might, well, I'm thinking perhaps that should just apply across the board. Plus, we've come into the practice of reducing the fee because it might be in our sensitivities too high. So we've been reducing it from 150 to 70 commonly. So maybe this standard credit, this standard deduction would make us feel more comfortable moving forward. I'm almost done. The last bit of the ordinance talks about and defines replacement of the protected trees. It establishes standards for timing and the payment of fees, if applicable, and the location. It also defines protection measures at the time of construction. We learned about this just recently with Magnolia Center that's going in. The applicant had all the intentions of preserving trees, outlined the area, and then ran into some problems in terms of the contractor moving the fencing. So some of the trees were impacted. The disposal of trees, we needed to define that. So we're learning as we go, and we're writing standards, and we'll have clear pre-construction requirements as we move forward. We're incorporating details that'll be uniform that you see here into our ordinance. And then in terms of replacement and maintenance after development, we're establishing requirements and a time frame for preserving trees if they do die after construction is complete. It could be 1 to 3 years. I've seen it in both ways in the benchmark cities that we've reviewed. And then we also define the administration of our tree fund. How can we use the trees, when and where? Because we do collect fee in lieu of sometimes if the trees aren't replanted, or if all aren't. So next steps, we plan to incorporate your comments into the draft ordinance. We want to test replacement rates and credits against the example subdivision, and probably use a commercial one as well, to see how fair it is. We do not want to not be fair to our community, development community. We want to review the draft ordinance in detail with key staff members. And then we would also like to have a neutral registered landscape architect to offer feedback and advise on any gaps that they might see before we go live and hold public hearings and amend the UDC. And then any questions? Going back to the administrative, is there any feeling about wanting to move this all to staff versus holding on to some piece of this? And maybe you don't want to answer it now.
I don't mind giving a comment.
Go ahead.
So I think once we get this thing figured out, that this needs to be a staff administration function. I think the definitions are going to help. And I also think some sort of a safety net, and I'll use 10% as an example. If through staff we're just unable to save 10% of the trees, then that may be a negotiation chip for staff to say, this will have to go before council if we're not
Like that.
at least at this level. And then hope that council never has to approve another tree alternative compliance. Because I think you guys are doing an excellent job, and the purpose of this was to get it, to a point that it could be staff's function.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Good points.
Any other questions?
I agree 100%, Scott. But I do have a question. The administration of the funds.
Yes.
Where do those funds go to now?
Well, there is a tree fund, and it's funny because I just passed Leanne in the hallway, and I said, I need to get with you to make sure that what we're writing. So it's for replanting. I believe, George, do you have any knowledge further than what I have?
I can. We use it for some replacement for trees at the park, and for replacement of trees in the right-of-way. We also use it for match for the Green Ribbon Program to plant new trees through that state program.
So
Thank you.
could it be used for any foliage beautification? I think that would be really good. And does it have to be a tree? Or, for example, when we did the front out here, or for the butterfly garden or anything like that, can it be used for that?
That's a good question. I understand on the surface that it has to go for trees. Now, a crepe myrtle would qualify as a tree, so that's,
Yes.
and you could kind of argue that, I suppose, one way or the other. But it, as opposed to plants like you see in front, I don't believe it can be used there. The other element I just mentioned is we also use that as part of our membership criteria for the Tree City USA program, and how we how we replant trees.
Any other questions, comments? I just have one question on existing homes. If someone was to remove a tree, they need to get a permit now? Is that the way you're?
Well, the way we're writing it, as it's written right now in draft form, they would not get a permit for a protected tree 6 inches or greater. Though, and this is, we're toying with this, if there's a, and I didn't bring it up because it is also a zoning matter. So if you have, and I'll use Meritage as an example. They develop and the homes go in, and 5 years from now, someone removes the 2 trees that are required by our landscape ordinance. That's technically a violation of the zoning, and they should be replaced. Now, if they've grown to 6 or 8 inches, would we require them to replace it at the extra rate? No, of course we wouldn't. We're saying I at first thought about writing into the ordinance that it would be simply a 1-to-1 for 1 tree removed, 1 tree replaced if it's a required part of a landscape plan or PD provisions. But I purposefully didn't bring it up because it's really not related to, that would fall under more zoning rather than, because it would be exempt technically from this scenario, from the tree preservation scenario.
Okay.
Does that follow with what council would like, or?
I'm just suggesting that it could be a problem down the road.
Yes.
If you have a preserved tree and then all of a sudden they didn't like it.
Well, and that's, yes, agreed. And that's why we're trying to only give the credits for trees that end up in common open space. And then we can write provisions for the HOA or a POA in terms of maintenance and replacement.
Yep. Very good. Thank you.
I have a really quick question. You were talking about the Magnolia Center project that's going in, and the contractor moved some of the protective fencing that was there. What
was the remedy?
Yeah, I guess.
And I have to say, for the applicant, he was very upset because he.
Sure, I understand, but it still happened.
Yes, so it was 65 caliper inches that were removed. It was four trees that had to be removed. So what they're doing is he's replacing, I can get you the actual numbers, but I believe he's replacing 7 3-caliper inch trees and then upsizing almost every tree by 1 caliper inch up to 4 inches on the site. So you'll have a greater impact when they're planted. But we definitely learned, and he's a newer, he's a developer, a newish developer, so he's learning as well.
Yeah, I drive by and I think, wait, were there more trees there? Like, I thought I was seeing things. I'm like, no, there's got to be trees that are gone that were there, but that he originally tried to save. Yes. Because it was pretty, it was. Because he left so many mature trees. Mm-hmm. There's still some mature ones there on the corner, yes. But like going a little bit south towards the Kia dealer, there are some that are gone.
Well,
from there.
Those the ones that were impacted were the trees along Tower Ridge, right along the south west property line. So.
Any other questions? Comment? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Item number 2, receive a presentation of the development plans for the Parkway at the districts submitted by Realty Capital Management, LLC, for the city-owned property located at the southwest corner of Interstate 35E and Corinth Parkway. Mr. Hart.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we'd like to have our planning director, Helen Eve Biddle, to lay out this item for you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I think some of you all are familiar with the Parkway District. This is a rendering of what the development might look like from Corinth Parkway looking south into the community. The property has a base zoning district right now of MXC, mixed use commercial, and they're proposing a PD with that base district to allow for development standards and for everything that they want to do on the property. To familiarize yourself with the location, it's along 35 at Corinth Parkway, and it's the property all that's north of this drainage Lynchburg Creek area. Ms. Pickens, the tree you're talking about, I'm very familiar with. It's right at the corner there. That is a big tree. And here's another orientation map so you can understand what type of zoning is surrounding it. I-35 is an excellent land use buffer. To the west, we have single-family residential. To the south, MXC. To the southwest, we have PD31, which is the Oxford apartments, and then the PD30, which is the undeveloped townhouse property. I want to walk you through the development and how they're approaching all of their development standards and amenities and any type of exceptions to our regulations. They look at this as different blocks. They have A through E, and they're listed on the left-hand side. Up at the top, you have a restaurant retail section, and the idea is to have a minimum of 3 restaurant pad sites. And none of those have drive-through facilities. We're working with them on the opportunity in case 1 or 2 of those might want to combine, or all of them to be some type of a food hall, which I think you all are very familiar with the food hall concept, like Legacy Hall. And then on Block B, that is the 80-room hotel proposed, along with a potential coffee shop, but more of a craft coffee shop. Not really, we're trying to do our best to restrict it to a quality, not another fast food drive-through restaurants, what I'm trying to say. So we're working in zoning, but we're also working through economic development agreements to ensure we get what we want, because we've heard for years from you all that we don't want to have any more fast food drive-through restaurants. The hotel has 80 guests. It has required covered seating around the pool area. It has a lobby seating area, as well as a bar and lounge requirement. Then Block C is our urban residential, which is the multifamily. They're proposing 327 units and a minimum of 2,500 square feet of ground floor commercial. You can also see with the shading and shadow, it does include a parking structure. And that's something that staff has been working hard to obtain on this development. The comprehensive plan identified urban design standards and vertical use, as well as mixed use. So that's what we are working with them to provide on this property. Block D, it is a townhouse tract, and we're working with the development standards so that they could either be sold off individually, or they could be condoed out, or even just a rental product. But that is a housing component that is missing from our community. We get a lot of calls. Ms. Henderson, you ask about it all the time, and I tell anyone that comes in. I have a council member that would just love to see your development go through. And then the last block is Block E, which will be a city park. At this time, it's being proposed to be maintained by the developer. It will have a wet detention, a trail around it, as well as benches and other amenities. As I was walking you through the different blocks, I wanted to point out that the development focuses on a promenade that's initiated at Corinth Parkway and travels through the development down to the city park. So that would be here's Corinth Parkway, and, sorry, the mouse is not my friend, all the way through A, B and C, D, and down here to E. The uses for the restaurant, retail, commercial areas have been tailored to fit the vision of City Council and the community. We're encouraging the sit-down restaurants, select service hotel, coffee shop, and ground floor retail. We've tried to eliminate a lot of the uses that are permitted in the MXC to get more of this mixed use, walkable, not so much service, but focusing on what can be served for the residents that live in this area, as well as folks that might be driving by and curious as to what is in that development. The development standards emphasize the urban style with on-street angled parking, heavily landscaped streetscape, and trails. The promenade that I spoke about earlier, it'll be 24 feet in width with 12 feet of paving. So that's quite a nice area for folks to walk and have activities. The restaurant area is also centered on a larger open area so that they can have outdoor dining and patios. They're proposing a tree save area at the northwestern area, just west of the restaurants. There are a lot of older, mature, beautiful trees in that area. This also serves as an excellent buffer to the folks that live on North Haven and Silver Meadow. Additionally, we have landscape buffers along Corinth Parkway and also along I-35. With the future right-of-way and all of the development, we're working with them on some of those widths to establish like an absolute minimum, but in our best hope to maintain the requirements based on our landscape buffers adjacent to major thoroughfares. I pointed out the on-street angled parking that comes off of Silver Meadow, and then this existing median opening along Corinth Parkway to drive through the community as well. And then I pointed out earlier trails and benches along the park and detention area. There are a number of architectural standards that are going to be addressed in the PD to provide for flexibility on external building material, or actually require materials on the exteriors, but on the interiors, a little bit of flexibility. I say the multifamily area, you can see the inner core area is not visible from a public street. So in those areas, we can allow a certain percentage of hardy or some other material because no one else sees them. But trust me, these guys are good developers, and we trust that they're going to do a really nice project for us and them. They want to succeed. The windows will have a 3-inch recession around them. The structure materials and pallets shall be earth tones. The residential units shall have stoops, and the commercial block C is proposed to have a maximum percentage of glass on the storefronts and masonry base, a minimum of 18 inches from the ground level, so that it's not your typical retail strip center where it's glass all the way from top to bottom. The townhouses will have carriage-styled garage doors and a minimum roof pitch of 8 to 12. One of the last items that we're working on with them is signage, and they're referencing our UDC. However, they are requesting to go up to a 40-foot height on a monument sign, and that's pretty high. So we're trying to get them down a little bit, and then the proportional standards for sign area as well as copy area aren't really working out or calculating right now. So those items are still under review, and we'll get those worked out. Our next steps, we're finalizing the PD documents and development agreements that you may be seeing soon. There'll also be community outreach, resident meeting early to mid-July. The P&Z public hearing is scheduled for July 26th and City Council on August 19th. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions from council?
The 2,500 square foot on the multifamily commercial seems a little low to me. I think I remember Bob talking about, in relation to the development for Agora, that they can design those ground floor units so that they can be converted to commercial when the market will support it. Because we don't want to design a bunch of commercial space that the market won't support. Can any of that be built into the design criteria, or has that been considered?
It's been talked about, and they've pushed back quite a bit. And for retail to be in that location, tucked behind the hotel and the coffee shop, and my thoughts are they feel with all of that area devoted to the restaurants, that's their gift to give us. We've wanted sit-down restaurants for a long, long time. The commercial's permitted in that area as well. So if you have the 3 restaurant minimum, and the remainder could be some type of retail commercial as well.
Their feeling is the market wouldn't support a commercial tenancies there that would outperform residential rent, right? Or they'd build them.
Well, a lot of it's the location and where it is. You're seeing us take the other side when it's up within the Agora or the Commons area. Then you've got the retail, or you have the demand for retail will be much stronger, and the walkability. The difficulty here is along the I-35 frontage road. That makes that.
It has no visibility, and it doesn't have circulation from anywhere else.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Whereas the Agora will be surrounded by streets.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. You mentioned a coffee shop on 35, but you also said there would be no drive-throughs.
That's the tricky part that we're working on with the agreements, the 380 agreement, to tailor so that we don't have a fast food drive-through restaurant, and it'll be more of what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, this would be a coffee shop that would have a drive-through component, but it's not the restaurant, but it is a drive-through.
But the coffee shop would have a drive-through.
Yes,
Coffee
right.
shop.
And it is the one, bear with me on the mouse. That's proposed right here.
Okay, that makes more sense for a coffee shop that it would need a drive-through.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was asking that.
Probably the people that want coffee would like to have a drive-through. Oh, yeah.
That's what I was thinking, and that's why I was asking the question. So we're going to have a 380 agreement with them, so that's why, because I noticed a lot of the things that we're saying, I didn't think we could dictate anymore.
Yeah, and at the 19th meeting, or the meeting immediately after that, we'll also have amendments to the 380 agreement that would accomplish some of this.
That's exciting.
Any questions or any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, item number 3, review and discuss proposed golf cart registration. Mr. Hart.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we're going to have our city engineer, George Marshall, to come up and lay out this item for you. And this particular item also has an agenda item for your consideration.
Thank you, Bob. So, I think this will be our 3rd or 4th time talking about golf carts. So maybe we can put this to bed. I don't know. We'll see.
I just want the record to reflect that Patricia finds something about this funny, and we'll have to find out after the meeting what it is.
Okay. So just a quick overview. June 2020, we talked to you about a work session to discuss the legality and then how we should proceed with the future course of action on it. We proceeded with a survey in August to September. With that public survey, we had 119 respondents out of our population. The focus on the golf cart survey was the access, their opinion, golf cart ownership, and then safety requirements. I'm not going to go into, I don't know why that is there, sorry. This is a map just showing the location of all the respondents. So it is a broad spectrum of across the city. So that's good to see. As far as the legality of driving golf carts on city streets, the transportation code allows for it, as long as we haven't adopted an ordinance prohibiting it. And so, but it has to be on a street with a posted speed of 35 miles an hour or less, which we discussed when we were adopting new street speeds and so forth. So Corinth Parkway would be an allowed street to drive your golf cart on if we passed an ordinance. Package delivery like UPS, there's some other special categories in there that's not covered in this ordinance. It's a separate with the transportation code. And a golf cart is allowed to drive across an intersection, say 2181. If they're on a 35 mile an hour or less street, they can cross 2181 to because it's a 50 mile an hour roadway. They're required to have a slow moving emblem, headlamps, tail lamps, reflectors, parking brake, and mirrors. That's the state requirements. And then, of course, they do have to have liability insurance. A definition of a golf cart, it has no less than 3 wheels, maximum speed 15 to 25 miles an hour. So this, doesn't refer to an ATV. We'll get into that a little bit further. Self-propelled vehicles have to follow the rules of the road. Something that wasn't in my staff report, but the Attorney General here in Texas recently clarified that a driver's license is required to drive a golf cart on public streets, which correlates with what we were proposing. And then, of course, a neighborhood electric vehicle is not the same, where it actually has stop and turn signal lamps and windshield, seat belts, and all that kind of fun jazz. The off-highway vehicle, like an ATV, a Razor, Polaris, whatever you want to call them, they're not the same. So the ordinance that we're passing if we pass it, would not allow for those types of vehicles to be driven on the street either. State law doesn't allow it, so we wouldn't be able to allow for it either. But there are certain instances where if it's a utility or a farmer, rancher, or whatever, by state law they're allowed to, as long as they meet the certain restrictions. So in the proposed ordinance that we have mimics the ordinance that was passed by Hickory Creek and Lake Dallas. So we're just trying to be consistent within the lake cities. So 35 mile an hour or less, you're going to have to obtain a permit from the police department. And, I'm sorry. There would be reciprocity for use across cities, so you don't have to get a permit in all 3 cities. You do have to have a driver's license. You have to have your insurance. There is an exception to city employees if they're acting within their course and scope of their job. Say we're doing Pumpkin Palooza or something like that. Additionally, driver and passengers must remain seated and wear a seatbelt. And so, little kids can't be sitting on their parents' lap, that kind of thing. Trying to create a safe situation. And we also stipulate that they cannot operate the vehicle on any portion of the Swisher except to cross at North Shady Shores Road. That's actually in the Lake Dallas ordinance. They can't operate in a park, sidewalk, path, or park trail. They have to move the cart to the right and yield the right of way to the faster moving vehicles. They can cross a multi-lane road, like 2181. They can't have any more passengers than they have seat belts. So we shouldn't be seeing 10 people sitting on a golf cart. The one thing I'll note is, and this is in all 3 cities' ordinance, is we do require a turn signal. A lot of golf carts out there don't have all these things, and so the question is how many people are actually going to be able to legally drive a golf cart on the street. So there's, again, we're mimicking everything that the other 3 cities had in their ordinances. So trying to be consistent. And we specifically exclude 2181, 2499, Lake Sharon, and the northern and southern pieces of Post Oak, not the middle section between Robinson and Lake Sharon. So this is just a quick little map. The main change was we, put Corinth Parkway on there. And then, of course, you have reciprocity. There's a few different locations where you can cross 2181. We also specify that you can only cross at a traffic signal or an all-way stop sign on those types of roadways. And so there's really a limited location to cross those. It does not provide rights to drive an ATV, a dirt bike, three-wheeler, UTV, side-by-side, or a go-kart. So, and just... the key is now we have the ability to cross I-35, where if we didn't have Corinth Parkway there was no place to cross 35. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Or any question from council?
Yes.
Okay.
First question, how did this pop back up after we decided that we would just do nothing about it? Did we decide that we were going to... My memory banks said, we don't want an ordinance. Police chief said, we don't give people grief on golf carts, and if it's not broken, don't do anything about it. Okay.
Well, I think that this would have come from me.
Okay.
And it was us trying to work collaboratively or in
With the Lake
conjunction
cities.
with Hickory Creek and Lake Dallas.
Okay.
And trying not to be the odd duck out.
Which is a good point, because I've had multiple questions from multiple of the fellow council members and thought, well, maybe. But anyway, so if we bring an ordinance like this into place, then the individuals that use their golf cart to get to and from the golf course now have to have seat belts, turn signals. Okay.
And a permit.
Yeah. So that's probably not going to work. I do not foresee that people driving to and from a golf course are going to ever want to put turn signals, seat belts, a slow-moving vehicle sign, and or any of those other things on their golf cart to go play golf, 2 or 3 times a week. So I think doing something to carve that out, or maybe Corinth is just the oddball. I mean, if we're going into this thing head first, we don't need seat belts and turn signals. I mean, I vacation twice a year in Destin, Florida, and there's nothing but tons of golf carts, and there are, no such thing as turn signals and seat belts and those types of things. And people seem to get along just fine. So that would be my 2 cents.
If you took the one thing that makes us different from the other towns, and where I would probably hang my hat on your comments, is the fact that we have a golf course and people are using the carts primarily to go to and from the golf course. Whereas, Lake Dallas, if you remember, I've wanted it so they could go to go buy beer at the liquor stores, and
there is a solid line of golf carts that go between the VFW and the local liquor store, and vice versa. So I've seen them and been stuck in that traffic, as a matter of fact.
Well, that was the single driving force within Lake Dallas, and I'm trying to remember what Hickory Creek had. But a lot of it was going, I don't remember their issue. I couldn't get past the Lake Dallas story. But you're right. But we could just take the position that, we have looked at that. We don't want to do anything different from the trivia, but we have a golf course. That's where the primary use is. State law covers it, and we opted not to do that.
Well, and I'm not against the reciprocity. So if people from Hickory Creek or Lake Dallas want to drive their golf carts that are permitted, then I'm okay with that. Our residents should know if they leave Corinth that they would need a permit in turn signals and seatbelts. But I think 99% of the people that drive golf carts in Corinth drive it to and from the golf course. We may see a few driving down to the local restaurants, but I don't think any of that would indicate to me that we need to require turn signals, seat belts, or registration.
But see, and would you want to discourage that other kind of activity? And that's what, I mean, and really just say that really we want to focus on going to the golf course and all that other ancillary use.
Well, I'm not sure if I want to discourage it, because I see Agora and some other things popping up and I see, wow, this may be a pretty cool opportunity to have some golf cart parking. But I think to put in a policy like this is maybe premature, and maybe there's an easier option if we want to show reciprocity between the other cities.
Is it an option to exempt people in this ordinance who are just going to and from the golf course? In other words, you don't require a permit if you're going to and from the golf course. But
Or could the permit be specific?
that's a good question. In other words, if I represent in my permit application that I will be using it only to go to and from the golf course, then you're exempted from all these other requirements. Because, I mean, the point of this, initially anyway, I thought was to create a kind of more community feel, open up, the people getting out and around a little bit, and I agree. I think these kind of onerous, what we'd be asking them to do. It's not consistent with probably the way the golf carts that our current citizens that own golf carts have equipped them. And if we do this, at some point someone is going to be seriously injured or killed in a golf cart. That will happen. And when that happens, this issue will be revisited if we do this. And if we don't have an exemption like this for the back and forth to the golf course, these more dangerous uses, crossing the highway, going to these other places, could get swept in with that other exemption. And I don't think that going to and from the golf course, as I've observed it, creates any kind of unsafe condition. And I don't want that to end up in the bag with this other use. And so I think I see the utility in being uniform across the lake cities. I think it's a great message and consistent with what we're doing with broadband, fire, possibly police, and encouraging people. We want to encourage people in the other lake cities to come to Agora, these other things. I don't know that a golf cart would do that, but it wouldn't hurt. But I do foresee that, any time and I just can't imagine a seatbelt's going to help. If you're hit by a car in a golf cart, that's a bad, I don't think it matters if you're in a seatbelt or not. It's kind of like having somebody in a motorcycle wear a seatbelt. Do you want to be attached to the motorcycle as you slide across? I don't know, but probably either way, it's going to be a bad outcome. And so those are just things that I'm thinking as I hear this. I think I could support it if we had an exemption for the people going to and from the golf course. But again, I'd like to have that exemption because if it doesn't, I can see a scenario where we do this for a little while and I'd be like, I don't like how this is going. And I wouldn't want everybody to have equipped their golf cart like this because they wanted to comply with the ordinance and then it become unnecessary in a year or two.
Would it be possible to, if you're a Corinth resident and you're going to go outside of the city of Corinth, then you have to have the permit. But if you're a Corinth resident and you're in the city of Corinth, because you're obviously going to probably be going to the golf course, would you have to have a permit? Is that something, Sam, that, and you're the attorney here, that verbiage could work?
I'm not being compensated well enough to render a legal
Really,
opinion.
Tricia.
I mean, that's a better. Patricia, why don't you answer that?
I should have said Patricia. Sorry.
Well, you're operating on Corinth Street. So the question is, are you going to regulate those? Because you can't interstate law only drive in a master plan community within 2 miles. Now, I'm over here looking quickly because I knew I had seen some legislation, and right now everything's kind of a mess, so it's hard for me to tell what actually passed and didn't pass. So there was some legislation, and it looks like it did actually pass, but I could be wrong, to extend that to 5 miles from a golf cart, or from a golf course. So that might be helpful, but it's still to and from the golf course. In looking at the language of the transportation code, that was the other thing I was looking at. It talks about cities allowing an operator to operate on all or part of a highway, and it says this is in addition to the operation under 551403, which is the golf carts. So I want to look at that further to see if there's a potential to be able to excerpt that out. I don't know that off the top of my head, whether you can or can't, but I think there's probably a lot of wiggle room if they've extended that to 5 miles from the 2. That at least allows more people to drive their golf cart to the golf course. So hadn't thought about exempting that out when I was looking at this in preparation for tonight, but I'm certainly happy to look at that.
George, will you quit if we have you come back and do this a fourth time?
I'm ready to hand this project over to Chief and let him take it from here because at the end of the day, there's not a lot of impact on me. I will say, since we've been talking about this, there was one news article about a death. And I hate to bring it up, but it does happen. And what it turned out to be was somebody that was I believe, a 10-year-old child, and it was not an accident or a crash between a golf cart and a car. He literally hit the curb, flipped the golf cart, and died. So there are instances where these kind of things happen, and you can call them freak accidents, or you can just say, well, shouldn't have been driving a golf cart on the road. So,
George, do Hickory Creek and Lake Dallas require turn signals and seatbelts?
yes, and that's why I put it in there. So,
But the state doesn't.
no, the state's requirements are.
I can't remember.
Headlamps, tail lamps, reflectors, parking brake, and mirrors. Those are the state's requirements.
So can you get different permits? Could like you get a permit to just go to and from the golf course, and then someone get a different like permit to go outside of that 5 miles? Or
I think that's the question, is that I don't think you have to have anything to go to and from a golf course. So the question becomes, if you're within the right now 2 mile, and I could be wrong, it might just still be 2 mile. If you go back and forth in that 2 miles, right now you can go in a golf course to and from a golf course within 2 miles in a master plan community on streets 35 miles per hour or less. So this is just the question I'm going to have to look at is that its own entity, and then based on the language of the section that I read to you a few minutes ago, is that something in addition where they're saying leave golf carts alone? I don't know. I haven't looked at this issue in a few years. So I did help a community institute one of these before, and I will tell you that it becomes people become very passionate about being required to put things on their golf carts. So they are usually not overly friendly to doing that because it's extremely expensive to do.
One more quick comment. I'm okay with all of it as long as we get rid of the requirements for the turn signals, the seat belts. I think people in Oakmont would be fine permitting. They should just know that they should not leave the city of Corinth because the other cities require seat belts, turn signals, and slow moving vehicle. That way it requires zero effort from our golfing residents to continue to do what they want to do, aside from if they're going to drive it not to and from the golf course, they have to have this permit.
The state does require the slow-moving emblem, the headlamps, the tail lamps, reflectors, parking brake, and mirrors.
Sure. I think
Yes.
what I meant was additional requirements on top of.
Absolutely.
So I could interject here. I do have a golf cart, and I do drive on the roads, and I guess I have been legal as long as I've been within 2 miles. My wife will be happy to hear that. So my question in reading through this is, what about the vehicle registration and license plate registration, not with the city, but...
You don't need to have a vehicle license plate for a golf cart. You don't need to get it registered with the state. You're getting a permit through the city.
Okay, then if I can get kind of technical on you here, if I may, because I want to be within the law. It says mirrors, plural, but I have a rear view mirror.
Let me look, if you give me a second. That's why I put this in here.
No, it's just one. And I don't want to have to add two. Or
It does say plural, mirrors. But I don't know, I mean, maybe you can split it in half and you got 2 up there. I don't know.
Piece of black tape
But one of those diamond-looking mirrors, multiple.
so I do have a UTV also. That's a whole nother subject.
Right.
I won't go there.
Yeah. Those will go 60 miles an hour.
Yes, they will. I noticed the speed limit. So, so mainly it's headlamps, tail lamps, the safety issues, and seat belts. I believe that I meet all of that with the exception of the seat belts, and for safety reasons, for the kiddos, there probably does need to be seat belts. I'm not sure you can get a golf cart with a seat belt, so it's probably an aftermarket, kind of thing. Turn signals would be most of the newer, nicer golf carts that I've seen. They do have turn signals, so I think it's more of a registration, that type of an issue than. Because really, to be honest with you, George, the people that are driving now are going to keep driving.
I know that.
Whether they have seat belts or blinkers anyway, right?
It's just a matter of whether the police will do any enforcement.
And I went by one the other day, and he didn't say anything. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I have a couple of questions. You said you cannot operate on Swisher except at Shady Shores, but then you also said if you're on a 35-mile-an-hour road, you'll be able to cross at Swisher.
That note about Swisher was in Lake Dallas's ordinance, and I should have made that clear. I'm sorry.
So you would be able to, if it's permitted and if we move forward, you would be able to cross at Swisher if you're on a 35-mile-an-hour road. And then could you go back?
I'm sorry.
Could you go back to the slide that had the exclusions?
While he's looking for that, Tina, I think you can only cross 2181 at a controlled intersection.
Correct. So that's what I was going to say. Is at a traffic signal, or there's no other devices. So was this what you were talking about?
Why are we excluding I-35E to Robinson? Because that's 35 miles an hour.
It is 35, but it's also I would consider it a more dangerous place to be driving a golf cart.
Okay. And then I guess Lake Sharon, that's 40 miles, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So I would be comfortable not excluding I-35E to Robinson because there's a lot of people that live there that may want to go that way, but I don't know if there's enough back roads to get where we want to go. But I just wanted to make sure about the Swisher Road, too. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you, George.
Can I ask a question?
You can go. Yes, you can.
Are we going to pull this item off the agenda later to adopt an ordinance, or are we going to come back and come back later, or?
Yeah, I think it'd be easier to pull it off. We can go back and talk with Patricia and look at some alternatives. The other thing, you talked about the Agora and so forth. We have a year and a half,
Right.
to worry about all of this, and so we can do this kind of a slow pace.
That'd be great.
And we don't have any liquor stores for Lake Dallas people to be wanting to come over, so we're good for.
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you, George. Okay, do we have any items on the regular agenda that anybody wants to discuss? Okay, if not, I'm going to adjourn the workshop session. And now we're going to citizens' comments. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Comments about any of the council agenda items are appreciated by the council and may be taken into consideration at this time or during that agenda item. Council is prohibited from acting on or discussing items before them at this time. And I believe we have a gentleman here. Is it Mr. Hoffman that would like to speak to us? Again, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and your address for the records.
My name is Melvin Hoffman. My address is 1708 Osprey Court. And what I'm here for is I sent an email to all of you in reference to freeze on taxes for seniors at 65 and older. And it looks like that was on an agenda last year, but it was never passed. And I was wanting to see what it would take to get that passed. Basically, every time you have an increase on taxes for seniors, typically they have a fixed income. And even though it's not a very large amount each year, it still increases and is accumulative over several years. And that can chase some seniors to a point where they have to sell their house. And I'd like to see taxes being frozen for seniors so that they don't have to do things like that. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
is it appropriate to respond since he's the only one? No? Okay. Then I retract my request to respond. Mr. Hoffman, I will call you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, consent agenda. All matters listed on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted in one motion. Should the mayor or a council member desire discussion of any item, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. I'd entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve.
Second. I'll second.
Any further discussion? Cast your vote. It's unanimous. Business agenda. Item number 6, consider approval of the ordinance number 21-06-17-18, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Corinth, Texas, amending Title 7, Traffic Code of the City Code of Ordinances by adding a new Chapter 73. Are we going to table that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, that will be taken off the agenda. Item 7, 8, and 9 will be moved to the July 1st agenda. And the last item is item 10, discuss and consider approval of a professional engineering, design, and surveying contract with Lockwood, Andrews, and Newman Incorporated for the street and utility infrastructure for NCTC Way and the related design of the closure of the railroad crossing at North Corinth Street and Walton Drive in the amount of $307,281 and authorizing city manager to execute any necessary documents. Mr. Hart.
Mayor and Council, this is again with George Marshall, our engineer, to lay out this item.
So first off, I would like to apologize to Mark Mathis with LAN, is I misspelled Mr. Newman's last name there. It's Newnam, so I apologize. Found that out just today. Do we have my presentation? We'll start over. No.
We're into golf carts again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was going to have them one after another, right? So,
Yeah, there you go.
So I know I always get asked, why are we choosing a certain engineering firm to do something, right? Well, LAN worked with us and DCTA on the station concept, with the 3 different locations and all that kind of stuff. Specifically for a new crossing and closure of 2 crossings, we really need somebody that knows railroad stuff, and it is a specialized engineering, and so to go with them is the best bet for us to make sure we can move this thing smoothly through the process. Just as a refresher, during the study, they identified that these 2 crossings at North Corinth Street and Walton Drive needed to be removed, and then we could possibly install a new one up here in order to be able to get a train station down in this area. So their design would include a 2 to 3 location options for NCTC Way. We want to make sure that we're trying to maximize the developable land over in this funny triangle area. And so trying to figure out exactly the right alignment and working with McLean's and so forth, they're going to help us get through that process and also meet the railroad spacing requirements that we need to provide. And then the other piece is just designing of the 2 railroad crossing closures. We look to take a contract amendment in the future for Jones Carter to add this little piece of North Corinth Street realignment to their contract because they're already under design on the TOD streets. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions from council?
I do. Sorry. Why are we closing these and looking at spending money on opening a new one when none of that's even been approved yet? We don't even know that we're going to have a train stop yet.
Well, if we talk about doing a rail stop at the location that we're discussing, we're not eligible to put a train stop there because of the location between the 2 crossings. So in order for that to be considered, we have to move the North Corinth Street and Walton further to the north. Then it's far enough away. It's far enough away to be, to allow the crossing or the rail stop to actually be built. Now, this is the engineering design so that we can acquire the right-of-way for NCTC Way as it crosses the rail stop. We don't have to go ahead and build that just yet. Then we can wait. But without a plan to relocate the crossing, we're not going to be eligible to proceed. So this is one of the early steps to be able to proceed with wanting to join DCTA and to get a rail stop.
So you're saying that DCTA will not approve us if we don't have all of this done?
Sam, you want to help me here?
Well, I don't know if it's that they won't approve us. I mean, likely if we're going to get a rail stop, it's going to be a part of an agreement that's much larger than that. But I think from the standpoint of being able to proceed with doing the studies that are necessary, in other words, they want to see that we're serious and that we've done what we need to do to change the street layout and other infrastructure to accommodate a station in that location. And we're willing to pay for some of that. Personally, I think even if we don't have a train station, the change in the street geometry that we would accomplish through this has benefits. And I think it'll just have better traffic flow and foot flow. So I personally am not concerned with whether or not this translates to that. I think it's a great preparatory step. But even if it didn't translate to that, I think taking out these 2 crossings, moving this street down here is consistent with our plan and a better street geometry, regardless of whether or not we get a train station. I think it'll improve the flow in Orgora Way, and I think it also opens up some additional usable land for development purposes. If I understand this in the context of our larger plan, kind of near Corinth, what is now North Corinth Street, and those properties that were immediately adjacent to NCTC.
So I'm really embarrassed to ask this. You have to pardon my ignorance. If we're not closing, the train will still be able to go through. We're just changing the route, or we're changing. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I think I can answer that. So we're removing the street crossing. The rails will still be there.
So there won't be a street.
There won't be a
that
road
crosses it.
crossing at those two locations. The rails will continue to stay, and we'll design to add the others at the top. When we build NCTC Way, that can be down the road. I really do think from a traffic standpoint, North Corinth Street realignment is critical to the TOD area, and getting that all the way up to North Corinth Street is critical. And so you got to. I think Bob kind of alluded to it. In order to add a new railroad crossing, you have to take away 2. And so we're hoping to use this as our 2 so we can add the 1. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an easy trade. In other words, I'd be shocked to learn that those streets were done after the railroad came in, right? I mean, you would never angle the roadways to intersect a railroad, in this fashion, especially that close together. And I mean, it's just kind of a mess. And I have personally found it confusing. I guess I moved here in 2008. I've lived here my whole life. I get in this area and I don't know where to turn left and how to get out of there. So I just, regardless of the train station, I will be happy to see this cleaned up.
I'm probably the only one that just couldn't wrap my head around it, what we were exactly doing. So this makes a lot more sense.
No, I think your question is legitimate. Like, if we're not doing this, if we're not approved for the railroad station, why would we do it? And those are the reasons I think we should do it regardless, but I think that's a great question.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from council? Okay. Well, I'd entertain a motion on this item.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we, hold on. We're probably going to need to read that in more detail, aren't we, ma'am? I felt her looking at me, so if you give me 2 seconds.
It's on the screen if you wanted to.
Is it? Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, I would like to move that we approve the professional engineering design and surveying contract with Lockwood, Andrews, and Newman Incorporated for the street and utility infrastructure for NCTC Way and the related design of the closure of the railroad crossings at North Corinth Street and Walton Drive in the amount of $307,281 and authorizing the city manager to execute any necessary documents.
I second.
Any further discussion? Cast your vote. It's unanimous. Okay. Council comments and future agenda items. The purpose of this section is to allow each council member the opportunity to provide general updates and or comments to fellow council members, the public, and or staff on any issues or future events. Also in accordance with section 30.085 of the Code of Ordinances, at this time, any council member may direct that an item be added as a business item to any future agenda. Mr. Burke.
Nothing, Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Garber.
Nothing at this time, sir.
Mr. Holsworth.
Nothing, Mayor. Thank you.
Mrs. Henderson.
Nothing, sir.
Mrs. Pickens.
Nothing, Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Hart.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we'll send this to you tomorrow as well. but the COG is looking for someone from a town of our size in that under 25,000 population to serve on the Emergency Preparedness Planning Council. And I'm sorry? You would do that. And I would like to just get one of you to, so we can submit. Okay, we have somebody then. So.
Unless someone else wants to.
No, ma'am, you spoke up first. I mean, it hurts my heart, but good for you.
Boy, this is,
No, I absolutely do not want to do that.
you get enough committees, right? All right. Well, congratulations, Ms. Henderson. I think you'll enjoy that. COGs were very well organized, and I'm sure that area they are will be very well organized, and you'll learn a lot. Okay, at this time, we're going to closed session, and we'll convene in executive or closed session to consider any of the items on the agenda item as followed. Pursuant to Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, after discussion of any matters in closed session, any final action or vote taken will be public by the City Council. City Council shall have the right at any time to seek legal advice in closed session from the attorney or on any agenda item, whether posted for a closed session or not. And we'll be in closed session on item number 551.071, 551.072. And I believe that's all we have. What's that?
551.087.
087. Okay. So at this time, we'll be going into executive session at 7:22. Okay. All right, we're back in open session, and I'd entertain a motion on the purchase of the Excalibur property.
Mayor, I would move under Section 551072 regarding the Excalibur property that we authorize the city manager to acquire that property for a purchase price of $400,000 with the additional requirement that the seller demolish the buildings and any other structures on the property.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Cast your vote.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Holsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Henderson? Yes. Ms. Pickens?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? All right. We're adjourned.